on behalf of Parity and Logical Buildings. We're excited that you can join to talk about a very important and very timely topic, demand response. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with demand response, this is an increasingly important tool in the toolbox for utilities, grid operators, as a way to reduce electricity consumption at times when there's a lot of stress on the grid. So just like the heat wave we just had a lot of parts of the country, in the Northeast, where we saw temperatures over 100 degrees. Demand response was critical in making sure that there weren't blackouts, brownouts, other issues on the grid. And when you look at what's going on across the utility sector, there's a lot more stress being put on the grid with electrification, data center development, aging infrastructure. So it's a really important tool, but it's also a big and increasing opportunity for real estate operators to generate some additional revenue or a new side hustle, which is what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to get into that, talk about how it's easier than ever with automation to participate in demand response. So we've got a great lineup here, and we'll get into the agenda. So we're first just going to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about Logical Buildings, a little bit about Parity, and then we're joined by Gerry Grady. Really excited to have him here, resident manager extraordinaire at a large building in Manhattan. So we'll spend some time talking with him. David and I, providing some of our thoughts on how you implement demand response, what it looks like, the benefits of it. Talk a little bit about a guide we just released, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So to jump into the introductions, I'll start with myself. So I'm James Hanna. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Parity, and I've spent my whole career focused on energy management, energy transition, specifically for large residential and hotel buildings. And I'll hand it over to you, David.
I'm David Klatt, CEO of Logical Buildings. Just want to say thanks to Parity for having me today. I'm also honored to share the floor with Mr. Grady here. I want to thank everyone for joining today. And I just want to put in one teaser so that folks stay on for the whole webinar today. Later on in the webinar, there is a slide that I think is the single best slide ever inserted into an energy efficiency webinar. So stick around for that.
And then Gerry.
I'm Gerry Grady on the Upper East Side in 44-story condominium by Club Building, and with the help of Parity and Logical Buildings, I think we run a really good energy curtailment sector here, and we're happy with the savings, and we're happy that we can conserve energy when it matters.
Great.
Great.
So
So
with that, we'll get into just some quick overviews on Parity and Logical Buildings to give some context here. So Parity, we are a control optimization company. We like to call ourselves a remote HVAC optimization as a service company. And really what that means is we exist to maximize the energy performance of large residential buildings and hotels, typically that have central heating, cooling, and/or ventilation systems. And the way that we achieve that is by integrating with the existing systems. If you have an existing building management system or system level controls, we'll integrate with that, gain the ability to monitor that equipment, but very critically also remotely control that equipment so we can automate out any unnecessary utility consumption to deliver the same thermal comfort experience to the occupants, the residents, the guests, whatever it might be. So we're able to offer a savings guarantee as part of that. And then increasingly what we've been focused on and what we're going to talk about today is how we can use our ability to automate the control of this equipment to automate the way that HVAC equipment specifically can be curtailed to maximize demand response revenue. And then obviously another benefit of this type of work is it can reduce exposure to building performance standards like Berto in Boston, Local Law 97 in New York, BEPS down in DC and other parts of the country. So that's a little bit about us. To talk a bit more about demand response automation, If we move to the next slide, uh, what we're doing with this is setting up the ability for folks like Gerry, for resident managers, building engineers, to pre-program the level of curtailment that you want a pump, a fan, a chiller, whatever it might be, that you want to participate in a demand response program, to pre-program the level of curtailment that you're comfortable with so that we can test that, make sure that it works for the building, make sure that we're not pushing the envelope too far, so that we can find that sweet spot where we're maximizing the curtailment, which directly corresponds with the amount of revenue that you can generate, but not pushing it so far that you're causing thermal comfort issues. Particularly when you're dealing with high-end buildings like the Oxford, like a lot of the buildings that we deal with at Parity, these sort of more luxury focused residential buildings, both rentals, apartment buildings, as well as hotels. That's not a line that you want to cross. And with an automated approach, with the support of logical buildings, we can find that sweet spot to generate some revenue that we just sort of view as the low-hanging fruit, icing on the cake, without the building staff needing to run around and make manual adjustments and do all that sort of stuff on these typically very hot days where there's other things happening in the building. So to give an example of what this looks like on the next slide, what you can see here is that light blue 4 to 6 p.m. period is when a demand response event was called, which is pretty typical for what you see for demand response. A lot of times that's being called in the afternoon, in the evening. That tends to be when the electricity consumption and demand on the grid tends to spike. So that's a pretty common time of day that you'll see a demand response event get called. And what we see here is the electricity demand or consumption that's occurring over that period of time. So the black line at the top is what it looks like with sort of the more traditional approach to demand response, where you're making manual adjustments in order to curtail this equipment. And then that teal line below is what you're seeing with a more automated approach. And this just highlights how you can generate a bit more revenue, because what you're seeing with that black line is, to start, the building was being run consuming more electricity to begin with. So with the automation, you're running at a more optimized state to begin with. That reduces kilowatt hours, that reduces your bill each month to begin with. But then you can see in that section there highlighted in red, this building was actually a little bit late to respond to the event and get into the curtailment. Maybe that's because the building engineer, resident manager was busy, had something else come up that they needed to deal with. They're late getting to the controls to make the adjustment. So you miss a bit of revenue potential by responding late, and then only remain at that maximized curtailed state for a short amount of time before coming back up, turning the equipment back to its more ramped up state where you're overcorrecting on the other side. So certainly there was some revenue captured here. It's a good start when you're doing demand response, but with the more automated approach, you get into the event at the beginning, maintain that maximum curtailment state for longer, and then don't overcorrect coming out the other side. So this can result in as much as double, sometimes more, the amount of revenue that you're generating from event to event. So this is what's available now through the automation, and it also just makes the whole process a bit easier.
Also,
So with
James,
that,
yeah,
go ahead, David.
yeah, just to chime in on this point, the automation helps in a lot of ways, and it does help prevent starting late. It also, the sequence of events leading up to a demand response event has a few different phases, and you could also start too early. And that's another piece of the automation, is preparing for the demand response event, and then making sure you're starting at the exact right time, not too late, not too early. So just wanted to highlight that as we go forward in the presentation. Great. So at a super high level, Logical Buildings is an energy efficiency technology company. We cover energy compliance, energy procurement, energy projects, but probably the thing that we're most known for is being a demand response aggregator, or a fancier term might be a virtual power plant. a virtual power plant technology provider. But essentially what that means is that we aggregate thousands of buildings and tens of thousands of small electricity users, and we have an ability to be paid by a grid operator or a utility, and then pay buildings and smaller energy users for using less energy during peak hours. And I think just the best analogy to describe what demand response is, it's kind of like if you ever tried to get an Uber on New Year's Eve and the price has spiked. This is the same thing, but happening on the electric grid. But instead of trying to get to a New Year's Eve party, everyone's trying to blast their air conditioning units. So there are times on the electric grid when there is congestion and you have significant price spikes, and the utility would rather pay buildings and small energy users for using less energy during those peak hours. And that's a major thing that we do at the company. Importantly, just go back one slide, sorry. Importantly, we do this both at the building level, like for Gerry, and we also do this at the small electricity consumer level through a self-sign-up product called Grid Rewards. So not only can large buildings, multifamily hotel hospitality side participate in demand response, but small electricity users who pay a utility bill directly can also sign up and participate in demand response, albeit at a smaller level. And then just finally, we're a national company. One thing I just want to share is that we're going to talk about a few very specific New York City, Con Edison demand response programs, because that's where Gerry's building is. But all of the concepts that we're going to talk about in automation, demand response, electricity cost reduction, it translates to every state in the country. The programs might be a little bit different, but all of the concepts translate to wherever your buildings are. Great. And just as part of participating in demand response, all Logical Buildings clients have access to our software product called SmartKit. And one of the really great features within SmartKit is that we're able to integrate directly into utility smart meter equipment. So in addition to getting paid for using less energy during peak hours, you also have access to the system where you could, track down to the hourly level exactly how your building is using electricity. And this is just a small screenshot of what that platform looks like. And this is a couple days in July where you could track the building's hourly electricity usage here across the x-axis. And this is what that electricity usage heat map looks like during these precision demand response hours. So the hours leading up to a demand response event are sort of like the lighter shaded teal, starting 4 hours before the demand response event. The demand response event itself, in this case, is running a few hours from 4 to 7. And you could see how significantly electricity usage in this particular example drops during these precise hours. So demand response is a precise exercise of getting paid for using less electricity during very specific hours. Great. And just to refresh quickly on what some of the highest impact energy reduction activities are during a demand response event. Not surprisingly, the biggest impact is related to HVAC and specifically cooling. And so we advise our clients to start by pre-cooling, actually about 4 hours before a demand response event starts. We automate the pre-cooling of buildings, try and get the building a little bit cooler than usual. During the event start, raising temperature set points, either shutting systems down or raising temperature set points so that the HVAC equipment throttles back. And then post-event, bringing those systems back to normal set points. So cooling is always going to be the biggest bang for your buck in terms of energy cost reduction. There are a lot of other great things you can do in the building. Shutting off non-critical exhaust fans, limiting max speeds of pumps and VFDs. These are things that Parity automates extraordinarily well. If your building is master metered, meaning that your residents are all part of your one main electric account, helping your residents also participate in the demand response event goes a very long way to generating revenue for the building. Another piece that's not on the slide, but if you have any kind of on-site power generation, like a cogen unit or a backup generator, if you can run that unit, it means that you're purchasing less electricity from the grid. That's a great way to reduce your electricity usage. And then there are always more things that you can do in a building that are maybe a little bit more work, and have a little bit of a less reduction, but these are like the above and beyond measures. So things related to lowering lighting, putting up blinds or shades is actually a great energy conservation action. Locking a couple elevators if you can get away with it. Avoid heavy maintenance like a trash compactor. And if you have EV charging in a garage attached to the building, those are also big electricity users. All right, so the Logical Buildings partnership with Parity has been extremely successful. So just in 2025, we automated demand response for 850 individual events. So these events could be 2 hours, they could be 4 hours, they could be 6 hours, but there's a huge amount of coordination and automation behind the scenes happening between Parity Automation and Logical Buildings demand response enrollment. There were 60 buildings plus included last year that earned over $400,000 of revenue on our platform and reduced, this is 3,600 kilowatts. That's like the equivalent of taking 3,600 homes off of the electric grid during peak hours, just through the Logical Buildings Parity partnership. So we're a huge fan of automating demand response participation, and buildings that have opted to use Parity, but also coordinate Parity's automation into demand response events have outperformed other buildings and are doing really well. And I will now hand it to Gerry to talk about his building.
Um, so we joined up with Parity. I've always been a part of Logical Buildings in my prior building and in this building. But we signed up with Parity in 2022. And Parity really made it easy for me in the building. Um, we're a 44-story building on the Upper East Side. We've got 187 units, and the savings every year is huge. And we get a check at the end of the year, and that we can give back to the board, and they love it. So nobody minds us taking part in the energy curtailment. They understand it's good for the building, they understand it's good for the neighborhood, and they love getting the check back. Demand response at the Oxford. Why do you participate in demand response events? So number one, to take pressure off the grid. I understand, and my board understand, and my Brown Harris Stevens, they understand 100%. We participate, we take demand, pressure off the grid. That's number one. Number two, we love getting the check. At the end of the year, we sit down at the board and they're like, did we make as much this year as last year? And they always compare. How do you maximize demand response revenue? So we do as much as we can. Parity came in and said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do everything. And so they put, VFDs in a lot of my equipment, and, anywhere possible, I reduce as much as possible. I've got 5 elevators. I take 2 elevators offline. I get a pool pack unit. I take that offline. And then Parity does everything else. I get an email from Logical Buildings. I click on participate. And once I click that button, Parity does everything else. How do you ensure residents' comfort during the events? Um, I never have an issue. They understand what we're doing. Every once in a while, somebody asks a question. I explain it. They walk away happy. There's no issue. And also, we never do more than we can do. Like in our health club, we pre-cool and then they raise our temperature, so people are never really overheated in the health club. It may be a little bit uncomfortable, but they're there to work out. They should be sweating, so it's all good.
Yeah, and I just want to commend, Gerry for doing an amazing job at this building. And the building earns about $20,000 a year participating in demand response. I'm sure it'll be even more this year than it was last year. But Gerry's really doing an incredible job at the building, and is one of the, we'd call this building a heavy hitter in demand response, creating a very big impact and earning money along the way.
Yeah, and just one other thing I would add too is I think a lot of times people think, demand response is really just reserved for the big Class A office buildings or, you know, big giant buildings that have central cooling and those types of systems. That's not the case at the Oxford, and it's not the case across a lot of the buildings that, we work with logical buildings on. This is a building with a steam heat system and unitized PTAX. So really, we're hitting that big number by focusing on the central ventilation equipment and the units that just serve the corridors and amenity spaces. So, with Gerry's support, we've been able to hit a really big number, even with a more limited amount of equipment than I think what you might traditionally think you're working with when you're doing demand response.
Well, I think also you're hitting on an important point, James, which is that part of the reason why logical buildings and parity have grown is that there's generally not a great understanding of how much electricity usage is being used in the common areas and building systems in multifamily, whether it's rental or condo co-op. There are a huge amount of systems that use energy outside of the resident apartments. And that's really the energy cost that both of our companies is helping to reduce.
Um, Automated demand response at the Oxford. Walk us through what a demand response event looks like, start to finish. So I get an email from Logical Buildings. I log on to my smart kit. I click on um, participate, um, and that's it. The rest is done by Parity, except for three pieces of equipment: my two elevators and my pool pack unit. Explain the automation process. Um, there's nothing to explain. It's automatic. It just happens. I don't even know what happens, but James and his team, they click a button and everything else is just done for me. I don't have to do anything. So like I said, all I really do is three pieces of equipment, and the automation process, they ramp down my VFDs, maybe from 60 hertz to 45 hertz. Maybe they take the temperature of my health club up, from 68 up to 75. And so we're not creating an issue where people are uncomfortable in the building, but we're saving energy and we're making money. How does the automation approach differ from previous buildings? I'm in a 44-story building now. My previous building, 2 buildings ago, was a 35-story building. And when I got that email, I had two handymen. Me and the handyman were running around, we were shutting off fans, we were shutting off AC units, and we were doing it all manually. And we were, what if we forgot a unit? What if we didn't do something? And then when the event is over, we were running around trying to get all those turned back on. And that was very time consuming for me and my two handymen. And so the difference is now I don't have to do any of that. It frees up my time for paperwork, for emails, for calls, for helping residents. And my staff doesn't have to get involved at all. I do everything. Um, I even do it when I'm on vacation. I was on vacation 3 weeks ago, and I had three demand responses while I was on vacation in Punta Cana, and all three of them were taken care of. I called the lobby. I asked them to shut down two elevators. I called my handyman. I asked him to turn off the pool back unit. And then after that, they knew when to turn it back on, and I was done. And I did that 3 days in a row because I had three energy curtailments in a row from Punta Cana, and it was amazing. Manual, that was me in Punta Cana, enjoying my drink by the pool while
All right,
shutting down.
yes, this is, I believe, can we go back to Punta Cana for a minute? I think this is the greatest slide ever put into an energy efficiency webinar. So Gerry's in Punta Cana during the July 1 through July 4th, really serious heat wave we had in New York City, where I feel like I say this every year, the grid really faced unprecedented supply and demand imbalance. We had some voltage reductions. Some folks lost power in parts of the territory, and the Oxford was participating in demand response for each of the days automatically while Gerry was on vacation. And in this I think it really demonstrates the value of adding automation into demand response.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to highlight here is, I mean, it takes a lot of trust, this photo, as fun as it is, but for Gerry to be managing the type of building that he is and trust that the automation, the support, all the work that we put into getting to that point is gonna be successful and carry the day when you're dealing with 100+ degree temperatures. And as a result, the Oxford's going to be looking at another really big revenue check at the end of the year. So this is common though. I think summertime is when people take vacations, and that's also when demand response events get called. So the automation is what allows this sort of thing to happen.
All right, manual versus automated curtailment. How has automation helped your building capture more revenue more consistently? So, like I said, if I was to have to run around and turn off all this equipment, number one, what if my guy misses something? What if what if one of my guys is responsible for some equipment, I'm responsible for the rest, and I turn off mine and he doesn't turn off his? He's like, Greg, you'll never know about this. At least when it's done automatically, I know it's done. I know it's off. And then when I look at my smart kit, I can see that we did well in the last curtailment. How have peak demand? How have peak demands changes been effective?
I'll take this one, Gerry.
Okay.
So yeah, so just one thing I would share here is that in the world of electricity costs, peak electricity usage every month is extremely expensive. So one of the biggest line items on every building's electric bill is something called monthly peak demand, which is literally the building's peak 30-minute usage over an entire billing period. What that means is that if you turn on your cooling tower or you turn on your air conditioning system for literally 1 hour in a given month, you might double your electric bill for the entire month just by turning on certain systems for an hour. And so when buildings participate in demand response, yes, the core value is that buildings are earning revenue for reducing electricity usage during peak hours. But there's a few other ancillary cost reduction benefits for the building. And one of the biggest ones is peak demand reduction. So during those demand response events, normally the building would probably create a peak demand event. You'd probably be using the peak amount of electricity over the course of that given billing period. And so buildings that participate in demand response, especially ones who automate with Parity, tend to have pretty significant peak electricity usage reductions as well. And that can be very significant. It could reduce your, peak demand charges by 5, 10, 15%, which makes up about almost half of the electric bill. So participating in demand response earns revenue, but it also has additional electricity cost reduction benefits.
Thank you, David. What's the difference in your team's workload during demand response events? The difference is huge. My previous building, it was me and two of my handymen running around, turning everything off, and then a couple of hours later, running around and turning everything on. Now, I don't lift a finger. I call the front desk, they turn off the two elevators. My handyman turns off the one AC unit that we can't control with the system, and then they know to turn it back on a couple of hours later, and it's that easy. So for me, it's life changing. I have a lot more time to do a lot of other things that's as important in the building.
And we'll get one more shot of you in Punta Cana before we move on. But yeah, we also just wanted to plug this playbook that we just released. So, one of the big themes here is that with the work that Logical Buildings does, the work that we do at Parity on the automation side, we can make this really easy. And I think if you're someone who works with buildings that aren't doing demand response or run a building that doesn't do demand response, now's a really good time to take a look at it because it's not as big a lift as maybe you thought it was, or maybe that it was previously if you had prior experience with it. The industry's come a long way, and how precise you can be with it has come a long way too. So in this guide, we talk quite a bit about that. How you can do it, what it looks like, what the results have been. I mean, David shared what this has looked like so far, and just some of the stats from last summer. We expect that to be even bigger and better this year. So a lot of really good information in there. It's live on the Parity website, and those of you that registered for the webinar, we'll send you a copy via email. So if you have questions about that, feel free to come back to us with what you see in there. So to wrap up and summarize things, when you're thinking about demand response, this is something that you can do to start. If you're already working with Logical Buildings or interested in demand response, you want to get enrolled. So contacting David and his team, figuring out what the right programs are to get set up in, figuring out what the level of curtailment or the amount of capacity you want to bid into those programs is really important. And then, for those of you that are working with Parity and maybe aren't doing demand response yet, or are, on another automation platform, you can go that way too. And, I think the message here is that through the aggregation work that Logical Buildings does, the automation work that we do, it's really two sides of the same coin to give you the best result and really limit the amount of effort and time you need to put into this from an operational perspective. But David, I'll
Yeah,
hand
and
it
just
over to you if there's anything else you want to add.
yeah, I mean, just to close here, well, thanks again to Parity and Gerry. The partnership between Parity and Logical Buildings is really, really excellent, and is just a great example of 1 + 1 = 3. I hope for building operators are the foremost recipients, and so just wanted to share that building automation and grid services are like true value add services when you put them together, and just appreciate the partnership with Parity.
Yeah, same here. And thank you, Gerry, for sharing your experience. I know in this day and age, building operators are being asked to do more and more and not necessarily be given more resources. This is really one of those rare situations where an item can be taken off of the building operator's plate, at least to a large extent. So hopefully that came through with today's comments. But I think with that, we can go to Q&A.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone. So if you have more questions, feel free to put it into the Q&A or just into the regular chat. But we have a few questions lined up. So the first question is, for a building still doing this manually, where does that gap actually come from? Is it the pre-event curtailment timing or something else?
Yeah, I can start with that one. I think the it's a combination of a lot of things, and it's not going to be the same for every building. Uh, I think it depends on how quickly you're getting down to that maximum level of curtailment and how that level of curtailment changes in the manual versus automated approach. Um, I think we found with the automation that we can curtail a bit deeper and critically stay there for longer. And I think a big reason for that is the building operators um, trust that that level of curtailment is not going to cause comfort issues or other issues in the building because we've pre-programmed it, we've tested it, we've talked about it beforehand. So you go into the event with a lot more confidence because you're not kind of adjusting as you go. You're just going back to a pre-programmed level of curtailment that you've set up previously.
Yeah, it's all of the above. There's a lot of precision in maximizing revenue in these programs. There's the very specific, pre-cool, pre-event period, which is the third and fourth hour before the events. There's the event start. There's the curtailment itself. There's the event end. And consistency is really important in maximizing earnings in these programs. So if you do an amazing job in one event, and then there's an event where you're on vacation and you don't have a backup in place who can execute the same protocols, that will have a significant drag on your overall revenue. So it's both the sequence of events, but also it's the consistency that drives the most revenue in summer grid services and automation helps all of that.
Great. Thanks. The next question is for you, Gerry. So a lot of resident managers are worried that if they raise set points or shut down HVAC during events, that residents will be affected. So how much do residents actually notice, and have you gotten complaints, and how do you handle them if you do?
So at the beginning, I got one or two complaints, and it's actually funny. Um, Sometimes when the AC unit is broken and we need to get the company to fix it, people just assume we're doing energy curtailment and they don't even ask. But anybody that does ask, we explain that we're taking pressure off the grid to prevent blackout and brownouts, and they walk away and they're happy with the answer. And nobody in the last 4 years that I've been doing this with Parity, and even in my other building, nobody's ever given me a hard time about it. You just need to answer correctly so that they understand. And once they understand, they're good.
Nice. Thank you. All right, the next question is from Christopher Madalena, and he wants to know, are there any Con Ed rebates from automating HVAC system controls?
Yeah, so there's the what we talked about today, the revenue is a payment you actually get from Con Edison, that would come through logical buildings. And then up front, there are rebates available to help offset the cost of implementing the automation system, or in this case, the Parity system. So Con Edison, but also a lot of other utilities, Mass Save up in Boston. There's some great programs down in, DC, Maryland, Virginia, out in California that we work in that will provide a rebate or some form of incentive to reduce the upfront costs to integrate with the hardware, implement the supplemental hardware that's needed. So that's very dependent on the region that you're in, the type of building, but um, those incentives are still pretty good in most markets around the country.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is from Killian Moore, and he wants to know, can Parity help in buildings with PTAC units in each apartment?
So that actually I'll hand over to David because that's actually a place that logical buildings can do a bit more than we do. At Parity, we're on the central equipment. So the equipment that like boilers, like chillers, like condenser water pumps, hydronic pumps, central ventilation equipment. We don't do anything in unit to impact how the residents or guests are controlling what's going on within the apartment or the hotel room. We leave that to them, and then we're just optimizing and automating the way that the rest of the equipment operates to meet whatever that demand is. But I know David and his team have a program that enables those folks to participate in demand response with that equipment. So I'll hand it over to him.
Yeah, when we approach any multifamily building, we're looking both at the like core building systems, electricity usage, the common area usage, as well as the electricity usage in apartments. Are the way that we address electricity usage in apartments, it's generally through our grid rewards program. Everything that we talked about in this webinar, we have also packaged up for small electricity consumers in an app called Grid Rewards, where residents can self-sign up, hook up their Con Edison account to the app, track their hourly electricity usage, and also get paid for using less energy during peak hours. We also do have an ability to help the buildings upgrade to in-unit smart thermostats. And in those cases, we can sometimes help automate those reductions inside of the apartment units.
Great. The next question is, what does the process look like to start working with Parity and logical buildings? We already have a BMS and existing controls in place, so how disruptive is it to get Parity integrated, and how long before we'd see our first DR event?
Yeah, so a few parts to that question. So as far as getting up and running, it's fairly straightforward. The way we work at Parity is we meet the building where it is in terms of its existing controls infrastructure. So if the building has a BMS, that's helpful because it means a lot more of the automation equipment that we need in place in order to enable our service is already going to be there. So we would come in, assess the building, get an understanding of the condition of that equipment, the existing state of the control sequences, and then we would come in and put the additional hardware in that we need as needed, calibrate our software so that we're customizing our automation, not just for demand response, but for day-to-day efficiency savings and reducing kilowatt hours and therms and megapounds of steam, whatever it might be. And then we go live. When you factor in incentive procurement, it's a 3 to 6 month process to get up and running. And then when it comes to the demand response events, that's really dictated by the utility and or the grid operator. They're the ones that are determining, when the electric demand is going to be at a level where demand response needs to be activated, across the system. Typically, you see those start to happen, in June and over the course of the summer. There's also now wintertime demand response events that are getting called in certain markets. But that is something that's really more outside of our control and dictated by, again, the grid operators and the utilities.
Yeah, just the last point I would just reiterate on winter that, as buildings are slowly electrifying heat, winter peaks are on the rise, and winter demand response is becoming increasingly valuable. And we've had more events in the last couple of years than we had previously. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on, as the value of winter electric demand response is on the rise. And at some point in maybe the mid 2030s or a little bit later, it's expected that our winter electric peak is actually going to be higher than our summer electric peak. There's more energy that goes into heating than to cooling in general. And so the more electrification of heat there is, then you would expect to at some point have a higher winter electric peak than summer.
Great. Thank you both. Next question is back to you, Gerry, but how has your team reacted to automating your HVAC systems? Have you experienced any pushback from them? And how did you deal with it?
I'm sorry, how does my team?
Yeah, how did your team react to automating or implementing Parity and logical buildings into your building?
So my team is really happy. They have less work to do, and the pressure is off them. They have nothing to do, so they are happy. No issue.
Great, love to hear that. All right, the next question is, does the occupancy swings of hotel buildings make demand response harder to plan around, or does the flexibility actually help?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think with the systems that we focus on for demand response, the occupancy is a factor, but it's not an overwhelming factor in your ability to, provide demand response. Typically we're focused on the systems that serve the central areas. So, we get a lot of good demand response bang for our buck out of RTUs, AHUs, the units that are serving the amenity spaces, the lobby, other parts of the hotel in this case. So, typically you have a good understanding of how far you can push, or we have a good understanding of how far you can push the curtailment in those spaces without there really being a significant change in comfort. When you start talking about doing like, in-room thermostat setbacks, then yes, like that's something you'd want to be very careful about in a hotel setting. But when you're focused on these more common area systems, occupancy isn't as big a factor as you might think.
Sweet. Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left, so keep asking questions if you have them. But the next question is, what's the average revenue a building earns in a summer?
Yeah, so it really varies a lot. But like, Jerry's building earns $20,000 a year. We've got some condo co-ops who are earning $25,000, $30,000, and some that are earning $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. It's really all about the systems that you have. But the dollar per kilowatt reduced is pretty consistent across buildings. So it's just about, what systems you have and how much you're able to curtail.
Great. Someone who's attending would like to know, will this be rolled out to commercial buildings or offices as well?
So, I mean, on the demand response front, it is very popular in commercial office buildings. I will leave it to James to talk about parity and commercial buildings. Um, but uh, but yes, demand response is for electricity users, big and small. It's for office buildings, multifamily, small electricity users, etc.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking for Parity, we don't work directly with office buildings, but there's this type of solution and different flavors of it because there's a lot of nuances and things about the way that commercial office buildings consume energy, the way the HVAC needs to be controlled in those buildings that make them quite a bit different from residential and hospitality. But you can implement a lot of the same stuff, just not through Parity. And I'd say commercial office buildings are where on the demand response side, we're a lot of the first movers when it came to demand response. So, in part, what we're trying to do at Parity in partnership with Logical Buildings is bring that into the residential space and the hospitality space in a more automated, kind of less heavy of a lift type of an approach. Because, in these types of buildings, you don't necessarily have as big and robust an on-site technical team as you might find in a Class A office building on Sixth Avenue, let's say. So just to say that if you do have an office building, definitely a good opportunity to look at demand response, and probably through your existing BMS, there could be some opportunities to do a little bit of what we're talking about. But David would be the best person to follow up with questions on that.
Great. The next question is, so if a building is master metered, does that change the math on demand response, or does it actually make participating more attractive?
Yeah, so just the key thing there is that if a building is master metered, all of the residents' electricity usage is going to show up on your main utility account. And so what that means is that even if a small percentage of residents, if they participate in the event, and that could mean Not running the washer dryer, for example. It could mean raising their own AC set points by a couple of degrees during the demand response event. The more residents who participate, the more revenue will be generated for the entire building. Then that's not going to negate what the resident manager or building operator might do on the core building systems. So that just becomes a case of the more residents participate, the more revenue can be earned for the building in the case of master meter. When residents are directly metered and they have their own relationship with Con Edison and their own electric meter, they can participate in demand response and earn money directly for themselves. So there's less of that like communal, hey, let's all reduce and earn more money for the building aspect.
Great, thanks. Another question for you, Gerry, is what reasons made you decide to participate in demand response as well as optimize and automate your HVAC system? So two-part question. You can start with demand response and then do the automation and HVAC stuff.
So the first time I heard about demand response, it just made sense to me. And right off the bat, I wanted to do it. And I think that anybody that thinks they can save energy and take stress off the system should want to do the same thing also. The decision to go with Parity was not my decision. If it was my decision, I would have done it a lot sooner. It was a board decision, and it went back and forth with, proposals and getting permission. Brown Harris Stevens is my management company, and they were a big push to get this done as well because they have it in a lot of their buildings and it works really well. So both questions is I would do it right away if it was up to me. Sometimes as a resident manager, it's up to the board and management, but it got done and we're very happy it got done. We're all pleased. The board, management, and myself are all pleased with it. It's a win-win.
Great, thank you. An attendee has asked, so are you not controlling in-unit set points at all? What if my building wants to do in-unit changes? Is that possible?
Short answer, yes. An anonymous attendee should reach out and we can talk about your specific case.
Nice. All right. And the last question is if you could just remind everyone where they can find the guide.
Yep, so that'll be on the Parity website. You'll be able to find it there, and then we will email it to everyone that registered to attend today's webinar. So that'll be in your inbox before the end of the day.
Sweet. Any closing remarks from the panel?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone again for joining. Thank you, David. Thank you, Gerry, for being here. And yeah, just again, would encourage everyone who joined or anyone else that you're talking to about demand response to take a look at the guide, reach out to any one of us with questions, because you have some time between now and the next enrollment season, which really gets going next spring, to look at it, do your research, think about it. But demand response is not going anywhere. It's just going to get bigger and more lucrative. So it really is a great opportunity to take a look at.
Yeah, but appreciate everyone's time today.
Great. Yep. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.